we have to say that there are some amazing proposals that have been coming out of the House and the Senate in the last few weeks. In some fairly desperate economic times, when job loss is at some of its highest rates in years, when spending and borrowing and debt have gone through the roof, it's pretty amazing. We've come out with proposals like cap and trade that are going to add huge taxes on electricity and other energy, when we should be doing all we can to create more energy in our country and to lower the cost, if possible, for Americans. It's pretty amazing to me that we would consider adding taxes and cost onto the cost of living when so many are out of work and we're in very difficult economic times. And now we see this health care proposal that Congressional Budget Office says is going to hurt our economy. It's going to insure very few uninsured people. It'll cost trillions of dollars, again, at a time when we're having difficulty paying the interest on the debt that we already owe. We've proposed this massive expansion of government. And here we are today, supposedly discussing the funding for the whole defense system in our country, the Defense Authorization Bill, and the majority has decided to add on to that hate crimes legislation. Hate crimes legislation. It apparently scheduled a vote at 1 a.m. this morning for hate crimes legislation in the middle of a defense authorization debate, which should be bipartisan, should be focused on the defenses of our country, a clear constitutional responsibility. But we're spending the day waiting for a cloture vote at 1 a.m. tomorrow morning on hate crimes. There are many practical problems with this hate crime amendment that they are trying to force us to attach to the Defense Authorization Bill. The broad language will unnecessarily extend federal law enforcement beyond its constitutional bounds. It will undermine the effectiveness and confidence of local law enforcement, and it will create conditions for arbitrary and politicized prosecution of certain cases. But instead of the practical problems, I want to focus on basic fundamental problems with federal hate crimes legislation. The rule of law requires that we oppose this amendment on principle. Justice is blind, and under the rule of law, justice must be blind to the superficial circumstances of the victims and the defendants. The law says crime must be investigated and punished, and there is no evidence to suggest the crimes defined by this amendment as hate crimes are not being prosecuted today. This amendment is therefore unnecessary as a matter of criminal law. There is no need or even any law enforcement benefit to create a special class of crimes based on, and I quote from the amendment, the actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability of the victim. Indeed, as a matter of justice, this amendment is patently offensive. It is based on the premise that violence committed against certain kinds of victims is worse and more in need of federal intervention than it's more in need of federal intervention and swift justice than if it were committed against someone else. I'm sure most parents of a minority, homosexual, or female victim would appreciate the extra concern, but that also implies that certain crimes are better, for lack of a better word. And where does that leave the vast majority of victims' families, who, because of the whims of political correctness, are not entitled under this amendment to special status and attention? How can a victim's perceived status or the perpetrator's perceived opinions possibly determine the severity of the crime. The 14th Amendment explicitly guarantees all citizens the equal protection of the laws. This amendment creates a special class of victims whose protection of the laws will be, in Orwell's phrase, more equal than others. And if some are more equal, others will be less equal. That is, this amendment will create the very problem it purports to solve. Let's talk about thought crimes for a minute. This amendment will also move our nation a dangerous step closer to another Orwellian concept, thought crime. This legislation essentially makes certain ideas criminal, in that those ideas involved in a crime makes that crime more deserving of prosecution. The problem, of course, is that politicians are claiming the power to decide which thoughts are criminal and which are not. Canadians right now live under this kind of regime, where so-called human rights commissions operating outside the law prosecute citizens for espousing opinions the commissioners disagree with. This concern is only heightened by the last section of this hate crime amendment, which says it does not allow prosecution based solely upon an individual's expression of religious beliefs. Let me repeat that, because we're being told that this would not affect anyone expressing a religious opinion or value judgment. But, and I quote, prosecution based solely upon an individual's expression of religious beliefs. Two questions come to mind. First, if the Hate Crimes Amendment is really just about law enforcement, why should it even need a restatement of the self-evident fact that religious expression is constitutionally protected? And second, why include the adverb solely, if not to allow for the potential prosecution of people's religious speech, so long as it's part of a broader prosecution of the accused hater? Today, only actions are crimes. If we pass this legislation, opinions will become crimes. What is to stop us from following the lead of European countries and American college campuses where certain speech is criminalized? Can priests, pastors, rabbis be sure that their preaching will not be prosecuted? In Canada, for instance, Pastor Stephen Boysen was so prosecuted by Alberta's Human Rights Commission for publishing letters critical of homosexuality, a biblical concept. Or will this amendment serve as a warning to people not to speak out too loudly about their religious views, lest the federal law enforcement come knocking at their door? What about the unintended consequences, such as pedophiles and sex offenders claiming protected status as disabled under this legislation? There is no such thing as a criminal thought, only criminal acts. Once we endorse thought crimes, where will we draw the line? And more importantly, who will draw the line? Let me talk a little bit about equality and how it relates to this bill. If my own children were attacked in a violent crime, justice, true justice, demands that their attackers be pursued no more or less than the attackers of any other children. We all say we want a colorblind society, even Judge Sotomayor. But we cannot have a colorblind society if we continue to write color-conscious laws. Our culture can't expect to treat people equally if the ruling class treats citizens not according to the content of their character, but according to their race, sex, ethnicity, or gender identity. As we wait through the night to vote on this hate crimes bill, I would encourage my colleagues, first of all, to set this thing aside and let's focus on it separately if it needs to be focused on. It's not part of a defense authorization bill, but they're holding the defense authorization bill hostage to other things, much like we did a few weeks ago when we were trying to pass a defense appropriation bill and they attached a $100 billion giveaway to the International Monetary Fund. So in order to vote for the support of our troops, we had to vote to give away another $100 billion from American taxpayers. This hate crime legislation makes no sense. It violates all the principles of equal justice under the law. It makes what we think and what we believe a crime rather than what we do. It asks judges and juries to determine what we were thinking when we were committing a crime, instead of trying to decide what we really did. This is not what's carved above the Supreme Court, which says equal justice under the law. It violates all the principles we've talked about as far as blind justice, that a judge does not look at who's in front of him, but considers the facts of the case. Hate crimes violates everything that is essentially American and fair and equal about a justice system. It makes no sense to bring it up at all. It makes even less sense to bring it up under the defense authorization bill. I encourage my colleagues, particularly the majority, to withdraw this bill and let us move ahead with the debate of the defense of our country. And I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back.